What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the latest sequel coming from Dreamworks Animation for one of their most popular franchises, and that movie is called Kung Fu Panda 4. Directed by Mike Mitchell and Stephanie Stine, this film stars people like Jack Black once again, as well as some new faces in the mix like Awkwafina and Viola Davis, and some returning faces as well like Dustin Hoffman, Bryan Cranston, James Hong, and more. So I've never gotten around to covering the Kung Fu Panda films here on the channel, but I'm a big fan of the franchise. I've always been a fan of Po, the character played by Jack Black, and I've just always enjoyed the both potty humor, the chubby humor, the food humor, and just the fun kung fu action that these movies typically have, along with a nice message that typically adults and kids can walk away from with these films that ultimately have our main character Po learn some sort of big lesson by the time we get to the end of the movie, even though he's a very lovable dope of a main character. And I've said it here before on YouTube that my favorite thing about running a YouTube channel about movies is that there's no shortage of movies to talk about. So this kind of inspired me to want to go back and revisit those original 3 films and talk about them here on the channel at some point. But today we're here to talk about the 4th film. And I remember when the 3rd one came out, I was actually working at a Cinemark theaters at the time, and I remember the big hype around it with families coming to come see the movie. It had already been a little bit of time between the 2nd one and the 3rd one, and now it's been a pretty decent amount of time between the 3rd one and this 4th one. So what did I think about Kung Fu Panda 4? Before I get into that, let's talk about what this movie is all about. The movie opens up and we're introduced once again to Po, the panda, the dragon warrior, who in previous films struggled to really own that role, really own that title. He struggled with it. Even when he was the dragon warrior, he would second guess himself. But at the start of this movie, Po is finding himself at probably the most comfortable state that he's ever been at being the dragon warrior. And at the tail end of the last film, the film where he was reintroduced to his biological father after many years, his long-lost father, he ended up getting a staff called the Staff of Wisdom given to him by Master Oogway, the turtle. And he was pretty much told that he's going to become the new spiritual leader. So at the start of this film, Master Shifu, played by Dustin Hoffman, tells him, hey, you know, that time has come. You have the Staff of Wisdom now. It's time for you to step into your new role as a spirit leader and look for the next dragon warrior. But Po struggles with that heavily. He's not necessarily excited about the prospect of no longer being the dragon warrior. He's not really happy with the idea of having to pass that mantle off to somebody else. So he does everything possible to avoid that responsibility. Well, not too long into the film, they end up learning about a new threat that is becoming an issue across various kingdoms, and that is a threat known as the Chameleon, a sorceress chameleon woman played by Viola Davis, who has the ability to turn into any monster, creature, animal, character who she touches, as well as gaining their kung fu abilities. And so she is now wreaking havoc, and Po goes off on one last dragon warrior adventure to go and stop her. Now, one of the most notable things that people are going to be curious about when it comes to this film are where are the rest of Po's friends? Tigress, Mantis, the monkey, you have Crane, all of them who are all played by top tier actors, people like Angelina Jolie, Jackie Chan, Seth Rogen, Lucy Liu, and David Cross. None of them return in this film, and I'll say that right out of the gate. It isn't a spoiler. They do one of those classic things at the start of this movie where they kind of just give us a little animated moment to share the fact that they're all off on their own adventures. I don't know if the studio just wanted to make a movie and make it for a little bit cheaper and not have to pay all those big names, or all those big names didn't want to return, but for whatever the case may be, we don't have all of those returning friends of Po's in this film. Instead, along on his adventure, he ends up meeting a thievius fox played by Awkwafina in probably her 4th or 5th animated film role, where she's given the same vocal performance in like the last 5 or 6 years. It just feels like Awkwafina is giving the same exact performance with different dialogue in each of these films. With that said though, I have praised Awkwafina in a lot of these films. I have praised her in a lot of films that I've seen, including things like The Farewell, so I do enjoy Awkwafina on one hand, but there is that element now of hearing her voice in an animated movie and think, Awkwafina again? It just feels like she's becoming one of those voices that's thrown into almost every single animated film, and she gives the exact same vocal performance in every single one of them. So her character Zen, this thievius fox, ends up working alongside Po to go and find where the chameleon is so they can stop her. And throughout the course of this film, Po has to kind of struggle with the idea that he still needs to pass on the mantle of the Dragon Warrior and take on this new role in his life that is the spirit leader. And so that's where I'll leave the story at. On one hand, I found this to be a nice, fun reintroduction into the Kung Fu Panda franchise that has tons of beautiful animation that definitely lends itself to some really fun action sequences. The Kung Fu is there, what you came for the movie is there, the humor is there, that chubby humor, the food humor, Jack Black's very eccentric voice casting, of course, is always fantastic in these movies. He definitely gives a lot to this movie, again, just like he has in previous films. And you have, like I said, great animation, there's some great music, some great kind of redos of some popular songs in a kind of Chinese style throughout the course of the film. Hans Zimmer is one of the two musical composers in this film, so you do have pretty solid music throughout the course of the film. The visuals are great, the voice cast is pretty strong, but where I struggled with this movie a little bit would be in its narrative. On one hand, it feels like it 110% retains the spirit, heart, charm, and silliness, as well as the action from the previous Kung Fu Panda films. So it does feel like a worthwhile sequel, but on another hand, it also feels like a movie that was a little bit more narratively simplistic. And that's not to say that the Kung Fu Panda films are these deep, rich, lore-heavy, just heavy dialogue, narrative-driven films, but they do have pretty solid stories. In the last film, like I mentioned, Po had to deal with the fact that his long-lost father has kind of come back into his life. And so there was a real emotional arc for the character of Po in that film as he struggled with that. And in other films, he had to kind of take on this new role in his life that he kind of had to grow throughout the course of the film to fill those shoes. And so in the course of this film, he's already the Dragon Warrior, and the big message of this film, by the time you get to the end, is change. And that's something that I've always struggled with in my life, is change. The idea of changing from one place to the next, to moving to a new location, changing jobs, or just sometimes recognizing within yourself that you are a new person in and of itself. And I think this movie has a nice way of kind of saying it where, you know, as we change, the people we've been and the people we are will always be a part of who we become. And I really enjoyed that element of the film. I think there's a nice little message at the end of this film that's like a bow on top for kids and adults to walk away from this film with something nice to think about. But I will say personally that a lot of the film felt to be mainly filled with hijinks and action and big over-the-top sequences. It feels like it breezes by. It's a very quick watch. The pacing is very quick, so it is entertaining and never boring. But narratively, by the time I got to the end of it, it just didn't feel like it had as much character growth and narrative depth as the other films. Again, not to try to paint the other Kung Fu Panda films as these really wildly deep narrative films, but I do think that they're fun and silly while also having some rich story. And while I do think this one retains all the elements that make Kung Fu Panda what it is, there is a part of it that felt like the narrative was just slightly more simplistic, and so they kind of streamlined it to get more to the action and the fun, more so than actually telling a more compelling story. But there are some solid moments, specifically between the character of Po and Zen. I think Jack Black and Awkwafina had good chemistry in this film, and that's, I think, not surprising to most people, as those are two charismatic actors. But that's going to be my thoughts on Kung Fu Panda 4. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Are you planning on going to check out Kung Fu Panda 4? Is this a movie you're going to skip? Is it on your radar? And if you already saw it and that's what brought you here to this review, how'd you like it? Where do you rank this amidst the other Kung Fu Panda films? And I'll just end this with one last question, and feel free to answer any and all of these questions. What is your favorite film in the Kung Fu Panda franchise? All right, guys, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.